Welcome to the Pharma Insights Unplugged, a platform where we engage with thought leaders shaping the future of healthcare, medical affairs, and clinical research. And through this series, we aim to explore the evolving landscape of pharmaceuticals, digital health, and evidence based decision making, bringing valuable insights to professionals across the industry. Today, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Bhavesh Kotak, a distinguished healthcare leader with over 25 years of experience in medical affairs, regulatory affairs, and pharmacovigilance. Dr. Kotak has held senior executive roles in global pharmaceutical organizations, including Dr. Reddy's, GSK, Glenmark, AstraZeneca, and Ranbaxy, contributing significantly to advancing medical innovation and patient care. His expertise spans diverse therapeutic areas and geographies, from India and the Middle East to Russia, China, and Australia. So, welcome, Dr. Kotak, to Pharma Insights Unplugged, the podcast by Marksman Healthcare.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you for this kind words and thank you for the words of introduction. It's always a pleasure. I've spoken at various industry forums and some of them which you've organized, and it always has been a pleasure. And thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you so much, sir. So, Dr. Kotak, your career began in orthopedic surgery before transitioning into medical affairs and regulatory leadership in the pharmaceutical industry. So, what inspired this shift, and how did your clinical background shape your approach to medical affairs?
So, if you think about the definition of healthcare delivery, it's that every single interaction by a healthcare practitioner, it does not just mean HCP, meaning a doctor, but any healthcare practitioner, whether it's an Anganwadi nurse or a midwife or a pharmacist or an ancillary staff, having that interaction and delivering what is needed by an individual patient. So I started from the front end of healthcare delivery. I first did my graduation and worked a lot in the clinical setting. And then I became an orthopedic surgeon, first in India and then in UK. The transition was a very complex one and over a period of time. I was involved in academics. And so I was involved in departmental audits, mortality audits, morbidity audits, auditing our own work, presenting, speaking at forums, doing a research on the outcomes of our own work, and ensuring that we always were at the edge of the science and learning from that. By the route of clinical research and via the route of being investigator in trials or a part of audits, I then gradually became a steering committee member in many such initiatives, an advisory board member. And that's how, through a very long-winded route, I ended up in pharmaceuticals and medical affairs.
Got it. Now, this is really interesting. There's a long journey behind what we see today. So that's really great to know. So the next question, like you have held senior medical affairs roles covering markets across India, Middle East, Africa, Russia, and so on. So how do you tailor medical affairs strategies to such diverse regulatory and healthcare landscapes?
So the regulations differ, and it's a very intuitive thing to understand that each country has evolved to a different level and has a very geography specific requirement in terms of finding of products, in terms of how we can approach the usual on label, off label stuff, etc. But even medical affairs differs because the healthcare requirements in each country is different. For example, if you, and I've not worked in the US, but I've worked with colleagues who work in the US. It's a very payer-driven environment. Your interactions and therefore the work that you do and the strategies that you develop would be directed necessarily towards the payers more than the directly with the HCPs. In some countries, it is the consumer who makes the final decision. So it is more consumer driven. Because the healthcare environments are different, necessarily your work, whether it's strategic in terms of medical affairs or whether it's regulatory in terms of involvement with the regulators and the government agencies and the regulatory bodies, it would therefore be different and necessarily in Rome do as Romans do, so as to be able to be understood by the people locally, but also to meet the requirements is something that you have to do. That's where having an open mind and entering a territory not with a pre-knowledge of medical affairs or of the drug or of the science behind it or of the regulations in some geography, but with an open mind to say, let me find out what is required in this geography and therefore tailoring what you take there or having an open mind and starting from scratch is how I have achieved whatever I have over the period of time that I've worked.
Got it. I just took a podcast of one of the leaders, and he's quite engaged in Africa. And is this notion correct that where India was 20 years before Africa is today, and there's so much of potential there for the pharma companies. So, if you'd like to share any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in, for example, my role in Ranbaxy and my role in Glenmark. Glenmark was Middle East, Africa, and India, MEA and India. So it was a regional role. And again, looking at that and looking at my previous work, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, while the companies that I worked with did not have feet on the ground, we usually worked with distributors. It was very much wanting to provide healthcare to its citizens, say Mauritius, and to look at it today, or to look at mainland Africa. And I've done some sort of HCP facing talks, even in a country like Sudan. And there were people who were very interested in knowing the science, but the healthcare delivery was at a very primordial level. Having said that, the countries tried their best at that point in time with the limited resources to provide what they could. But you look at all the countries, including India, we've moved ahead with time. And I totally agree with the leaders that you spoke that Africa is today where India was a decade or two ago. Yeah, and Africa is big. It's a continent. So even there are centers of excellence which are possibly some places in South Africa. Some of them are way ahead compared to where we are. But then there are places and pockets in Africa which are far behind and lagging in healthcare. But then they've moved on and caught up to where India was maybe 15, 20 years ago.
So that's quite insightful. Now, sir, having led large cross-functional and cross-cultural teams, what are the key leadership principles you believe are essential in building a high-performing medical affairs function in today's dynamic pharma industry? Because you have been in the industry for so many years, I think I have to ask this question.
Amit, you're making me sound old. And I won't try to give my age away, but yeah, I've worked across geographies, and one thing I learned is you can't have a template and copy paste everywhere. Human beings have their own ways of dealing with things. There are then the cultural appropriateness that you have to maintain. So what may be right in, for example, and that there's been many leaders who have spoken about an industry agnostic. I'm talking about what may be appropriate in US might not be appropriate in Japan. Even in a country like India, what might be culturally appropriate in the far north may not be culturally appropriate in the south of the country. So keeping those differences in mind, respecting the local customs and traditions with your team members, eventually dealing with them, having a very high EQ is very important, right? So very high EQ, and you start on the right footing with your teams. The moment you have, and not doing it for the sake of being nice, for the sake of understanding where people come from and ensuring that you understand and the wavelengths are the same, then you can embed high performance wherever you go. I always looked at outcomes, and I've evolved over a period of time where I look at the impact I create there from. First, I ensure that with the teams, I understand locally, and I start with the leaders. If I have leaders reporting from those regions, I always start understanding locally what they want. Ensure that I've also ingrained in my work a high level of EQ. I try to understand what works locally and the customs and traditions, and then try to ensure that people understand what my expectations would be. Respecting each other. The moment you respect individuals for who they are and what they bring, irrespective of the hierarchies don't matter to me. We are all here at the end of the day to be professionally delivering what an organization needs. Then ensuring that the vision is well understood by them, and then ensuring that we are delivering towards a common vision. And then switching the conversation from not towards effort, but towards outcomes, and from outcomes to the more evolved people in the team having a conversation on the impact we create, because everybody takes pride in the impact that they create, right? Once you do that, and it's a very subtle change that you need to bring in the teams and take pride in their work. Eventually, when you get them to see that, that's when people start ensuring that they are also delivering towards a common goal. And that's the difference between a manager and leader, right? I mean, a manager gets people to deliver tasks in a timely manner for the organization so that we succeed. Leader would necessarily create a vision, get people to work towards that vision. Therefore, the tasks are delivered in a timely manner. And one thing is there, the intent has to be to understand the human being in front of us. The intent has to be pure. Everything falls into place.
Sir, the digital era has changed how pharmaceutical companies engage with HCPs, regulators, and even patients. So, how do you see AI, real world evidence, and digital health transforming the medical affairs functions?
So COVID was a great catalyst in converting everything to the digital world. And while a lot of things have gone back to physical world, we are having this conversation on this platform, and it's great to be able to see you and talk to you in real time. Otherwise, I would have waited for a long time to meet you, Amit, wherever we could have met next, wherever paths would have crossed. Similarly, the regulators have gone completely digital. For example, in India, all the SEC meetings for product approvals, for modifications of the pack inserts and adding new indications, or for clinical research approvals, trials approvals, CT approvals. Everything has gone online. And while the presentations are online, there are portals which have come up. For example, the famous Sugam portal where you upload everything. So there is no physical submission of documents mandatory. Mandatory is submission of those electronic documents in a specific order, and you can follow up everything. I mean, the world has become digital. So it does not matter whether you're an HCP or not. The friendly neighborhood local vendor has payment interfaces which are digital. So why would a HCP be any different?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and moving on, I think AI and ML will therefore be the next steps. A lot of people I know are using AI, whether it's Copilot or whether it's ChatGPT and versions thereof, for polishing their documents, for ensuring that
yeah.
they're in order. There will be larger use of AI. I don't think AI and ML can ever see a patient, interact with a patient, reach a diagnosis. It is something that we feed in, and the algorithms runs and make lesser mistakes and lesser errors. So there will be a lot of it, but as you probably heard, it'll be aiding and helping our decision making, whether we are clinicians or whether we are involved in healthcare delivery, wherever. So not just HCPs, but the entire conundrum. Yet the HCP will be making the decisions because there is a human being at the end of it who sits in front of them, and there might be a lot of subjective decisions that the HCP might need to make. So yes, the AI and the ML will aid and abet. In the regulatory world, over a single weekend, AI helped go through structures of drugs, looking at the
Right.
structure activity relationship, SAR, as we do in pharmacology, and
Yes.
suggested
Yes.
repurposing of baricitinib in
Right.
COVID, and it might work. It might
Right.
work. So AI will come forth in various spheres of healthcare. The one fear I do not have, it will not replace the human beings, but it'll be there as a help, and it'll also help us save on time, reduce error, think of more things that we may not be able to think all the time.
True. True. I know there is a notion going on the AI is going to replace humans. A lot of people they are scared and one can feel the heat as well. But yes, so far AI is being used as an assistant or as a co-pilot. I think that's a great thing and indeed and it certainly helps to optimize so many things and there's no doubt about it.
So I think it'll only be more of excellence in what we get as assistance from our tools. So it is moving to a place where it'll be more predictable, it can be faster, but the machine is not replacing us. It was assisting us in daily sort of work. It'll assist it at higher levels and it will excel at what it does rather than replace us.
True. So the next question, with increasing global regulatory scrutiny, how has the role of pharmacovigilance and regulatory compliance has evolved? And what best practices do you recommend for pharma companies operating in the multiple regions?
So, as we speak, the world is going towards more and more tighter regulations. We've seen our clinical research regulations evolve. Pharmacovigilance has always been the bedrock of making drugs safer for patients. It doesn't lead to an action in terms of adverse reaction is reported, and therefore we need to do something for that. It only makes the database richer and finds the rarer adverse reactions and makes it safer for the patients in the longer run. Now, India has moved on from where it was 20, 25 years ago. We have PBPI, we have the regulator looking at it, we have PSURs that we submit. And I think while we still cannot call ourselves a regulated market, we are moving in that direction. What it essentially crystallizes to in one statement, if I have to summarize it, is make the drugs safer for patients. So it brings in rigor into research. I mean, you remember how 20, 25 years ago, there was no regulations on FDCs in India. And today we see every FDC is
Yeah,
questioned. There
yeah,
was
a lot of
no firm regulations on biosimilars. Today there are regulations on biosimilars. So we are moving in a directions where there is a requirement of evidence. That evidence has to be of a certain quality and meet certain standards. And when we have those standards and we work towards it, we're making life better eventually for the patients.
true. I mean, I still remembered we just had one chapter on pharmacovigilance, but didn't know that the science is going to be so big once you get into the industry. So we can
Absolutely.
totally relate to that.
And I know I was the person responsible for pharmacovigilance in a lot of MNC companies that I've worked with, which is the equivalent of QPPV in Europe. And I
Right.
realized that I'm putting my signature on the dotted line when I'm sort of giving my submissions to the regulators every year. And I realized that I'm taking on shouldering a huge responsibility here as a person responsible for pharmacovigilance for the entire gamut of portfolio under me and under my team for the geography that I represented. So that sort of brings to light the fact that one chapter is now ballooned into a lot of finer aspects. I mean, I had to go back and read what signal detection was. And when I read that, it made me sort of aware of the fact that we're not just reporting passively. Somebody's sitting there making sense of all the data that gets reported. Again, an AI and ML come there. It makes sense of trillions of pieces of data and detects signals and makes drugs safer. So yeah, I mean, we know of various drugs which, after years of being in the market, were withdrawn when rarer side effects were reported. So yeah, it's all in the right direction.
True. I totally agree. So, medical affairs has evolved beyond scientific engagement to play a pivotal role in commercial strategy, patient centricity, and health economics. So, how do you see this function evolving over the next decade or so?
So I think you've nailed all the three pieces together: the strategic piece, the patient piece, and the health economics. So the one line that I say, one is the strategic function and the other is quasi-regulatory function in the governance function within the organization itself. The health economics and outcome research, and which we speak about, and when they ask me, I tell them that part also, where we communicate with the payers the value that we add and the value that we bring to the table, rather than just a pure conversation on efficacy and safety. And that's where eventually my conversation ends with, talk to people like Amit Dang of Marksman Healthcare, who knows a lot about HEOR than I do, but we need to move in that journey. And trust me, I do. I've spoken to a lot of people who might have reached out to you. But when it comes to the other two aspects, and I'll touch upon HEOR a bit later on, the strategic piece, my conversation is, we are strategic and governance, and we wear two hats. There are other governance functions like legal, compliance, and regulatory, and there are strategic functions like marketing. But we partner with marketing, and we are responsible for strategy and execution of pieces of strategy. We are aiming to be corporate leaders. We are dealing with healthcare products,
Right.
which eventually is used by patients when they're at their vulnerable most. So ensure that things are at the safest. Keeping that in mind,
Right.
the strategy piece is always starting with the gap. What is the gap? We learn what is the gap. And for that, you have to be in the field, talk to enough HCPs, come back, synthesize your strategy. It's always outside in and not inside out. We can't be arrogant and say, I will decide how I sell this product to you. We have
Right.
to work out what is the need, what is the gap. And even in products which are age old, like NSAIDs, they cause a little bit of gastritis, but we accept it. But
Yeah.
can we find something which is that unmet need? Can we address that gap? And we work on a strategy which is gap forward. We go out into the market and we learn what the gaps are. We devise strategies. Strategies could have various components that could be engaging with the HCPs, engaging with the KOLs, having doctor group meetings, inviting international speakers who are the leaders in that therapy area, who know the evolving science as the standard of care evolves from previous standard of care. We can recommend some evidence generation which will address those gap, publications and doctor group meetings and engagement with the SCP communities and cascading the learnings. There's a lot that you can do. In the medium term strategy, you could look at your portfolio, and the longer term strategy, you could look at the portfolio and you would do what we call in our company as ideation. So ideation is where we look at portfolio. We have an aim of being where we want to be in 5 years from now, in 3 years from now. And
Yeah.
we look at where we would grow organically. Inorganically, where would we be? We look at all therapy areas, we do the mapping of the entire pipelines globally. And when we map the pipelines, we look at current standard of care, evolving standard of care, and maybe future targets which are of interest, which are in very, very early phase research, like phase 1 or 2. And we map a wish list of products, and then we give it to the organization, and then we go ahead with the make, buy, or collaborate strategy. Make means we make it at the back end, and we launch the either the generic or the biosimilars after LOE. We buy means acquiring brands, and collaborate means in license. That is how we've reached where we've reached. And then
Right.
we put these pieces of strategy, the immediate strategy, the brand plans, and strategizing with the brand plans, all the activities that flow there from, and the long-term strategy together. That's the strategic. It's become very, very big. The role has become very, very big. And it's a proactive strategic role. It's the arrowhead of the company rather than a reactive role, which used to be in the past. We want to engage this doctor scientifically. What do we do? Because they have great knowledge and view. So that reactive piece has disappeared, or get us data. That reactive piece has disappeared. We drive strategy. We are the arrowheads of strategy. And as I said, the short term, the medium term, and the long term in various ways. Patient centricity by keeping safety, by donning the hat of the governance hat, the regulatory hat, and ensuring that we look after pharmacovigilance, we look after how we interact with the external world ethically. And obviously, the health outcomes part, the health economics and outcome part, where we translate the efficacy and safety, which was the conventional way of looking at the drug, to the value it adds, and allowing payers to make decisions on whether certain drugs need to be included, whether the payers are insurance companies and whether it should be listed, or whether it's the hospitals and the pharmacies and the formularies which should list the drug thereof. So that role and understanding value and speaking to people like you, how you arrive at HEOR is something that I think the entire place is where medical affairs is moving. And strategy is also not small, as I elaborated. It's very big.
True. Sometimes I just wonder there are so many hats a medical affairs personnel has to wear that it's not easy, and everything is supposed to be learned on the job because that's what not we are usually taught during our MD days. So it's really very exciting to hear all these stories via this podcast. It gives us so much of an insight that what is actually going on in the industry.
Yeah, I think knowledge about all these things is one thing, the bedrock. And everything I spoke about has a knowledge piece to it. And
Right.
the knowledge piece that you gain when you do your graduation, post graduation, is about the drugs and how it affects the patient and the diseases thereof that it treats. So that's good. We bring that knowledge. But
Yeah.
when we move into the corporate sector from the academic setting, that's all we bring. The knowledge of how medical affairs functions, the knowledge of governance piece, the knowledge of the regulations, the knowledge of health outcomes, all that is again a knowledge piece. The knowledge of certain therapy areas, the knowledge of disease journeys. For example, lung cancer in India is very different from a lung cancer in US. The journey
Right.
of the patient is very different. The knowledge of the
Yeah.
KOLs in that area. And when you have a medical affairs individual professional who's worked in oncology and dealt with innovation in oncology, knows all this and is a very different individual from a person who's worked in the chronic space in CVAD. So that knowledge, on top of the knowledge, I say there is the skills and competencies. I might have
Right.
the knowledge, I might have all this knowledge, but am I able to put it to use? It basically means putting the knowledge to use and effectively using your knowledge to deliver what is required at work. And therefore, you need skills and competencies, the business acumen, the finance acumen, the communication skills, the digital skills, the clinical research skills, and medical writing skills. So there are some 8, 9 competencies that I always hold dear to my heart, and cross
Okay.
functional collaboration being one of them. And above that comes the attitude that you bring to work. And
Yeah.
therefore, what we bring is the knowledge piece when we finish our academics, then the knowledge piece of the entire conundrum that I spoke about, where we function in the three places, then
Right.
the skills and competencies required to deliver this, and the attitude that we bring to work. So that's how I view it.
Excellent. And that's an excellent framework. I should definitely keep that in mind. So although you have touched upon this point, but I would still like to ask one more time, like pharma leaders say they must balance scientific rigor with commercial strategy. So what's your approach to ensuring that medical affairs remains independent and evidence driven while aligning with the business goals as well?
When I look at either a disease or a product, we don the hat of the purists. We go completely deep dive into science and ensure that one is that brings out the best of the science and the best of abilities to translate it for the commercial apparatus. Then, when we work with them, we're working totally with our business colleagues, ensuring that at that point, everything is okay because we need to feed into business cases also, for example, or head in the right direction with our messaging. But ensuring that we are the custodians of science and the purity of science is maintained, we ensure that we input it because it will give us the competitive edge. So, in cross functional collaboration, it means that we don the business hat. That means because we understand the science the best, leveraging it to ensure that the best business outcome, and there is no harm in it because eventually whatever we make as a business is going to be reinvested in business, and it is better for patients because then they can access more therapies and we can bring in more and more therapies for the patients, ensuring that we get to, because we're working for an organization, obviously the goals, our goals and the business goals are aligned and they're dear to us. We don the governance had to make sure everything is right, we don't end up doing the wrong thing. Just because we want to do well in business does not mean we end up doing the wrong thing. But it does not mean we are divorced from science also, just because we want to do well in business. In fact, if we want to do well in business, our science has to be the best. If I
True.
don't communicate what my checkpoint inhibitor does properly, if I don't look at what evidence I can have on my product, which might treat heart failure better, and if it's not communicated properly, and if my products are not available, how will the doctor ever give it to the patient who needs them? We are empowering healthcare professionals deliver best healthcare to their patients
True.
by all the engagements that we do. Keeping the one way to ensure that you achieve everything that we said, science, governance, everything is putting patient at the center of it.
True.
If I say the patient is at the center of it, I'll not do anything wrong from a governance point of view. I'll do the right thing.
Yeah.
If I put patient at the center of everything, I will want them to get the best of science. So I'll bring
Right.
the best of science and the best of governance and do the right thing. It is always possible to marry both. It's not difficult.
Amazing. That's really really insightful. There is a last question of the podcast. So you have successfully transitioned from clinical practice to pharma leadership. So what advice would you give to young professionals looking to make an impact in medical affairs, regulatory strategy, or pharmacovigilance?
You mentioned that this is very difficult when I spoke about the domains that we work in and how complicated the work is, etc. I don't see it as difficult. I remember Chris Tarrant used to say in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in UK, the offshoot of which we had Kaun Banega Crorepati. He said, a question is only easy, the answer of the question. The question is only easy if you know the answer, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, the most basic question can be difficult if you don't know the answer. And you might end up using three lifelines in the first five questions. And
Right.
likewise, when you first learn the bicycle and when you first time you fall, you don't want to do it a second time. But when you learn how to ride a cycle, it becomes sub-hypothalamic. You're just doing it, and when you
Right.
become an expert. So this is challenging. This is like learning to ride the bike, but there are so many difficulties thrown at us every day. And like when I was in a surgical field, hip replacements were became easy, but then a difficult one comes along, or a revision hip replacement comes along. It throws you. That's when you learn.
Right.
You don't learn, and the IPL season is going on. You don't learn when you hit two sixes. You hit the third one and it is caught at the boundary. That walk of shame teaches you you made a mistake. So, welcome to this world, is my
Yeah.
advice to the young professionals. You will learn a lot. What you bring is a lot of passion, the right attitude, and a lot of knowledge, right? The knowledge is about the drugs. You have to gain a lot of knowledge here. So, there is a world of learning open. It's an exciting world. And I'll tell you why this world is exciting. You're not moving away from the clinical world. A lot of people say clinical versus non-clinical. I used to treat what 40, 50 patients in a day in the OPD settings, back pain, this pain, that pain, operate on one or two on an average in a day, or sometimes in a week, six or seven, do some small procedures like injecting joints, setting fractures, etc. Here, with one launch, for example, one innovative launch,
Yeah. The impact.
in one of my previous companies, 100,000 patients on an average benefited from it. Divide that
Amazing.
by number needed to treat to save one mortality, one additional mortality, one additional life saved. And I was
Right.
thinking, I was a part of the teams which reached out to more patients. You're making a difference in patients' life. It is as clinical as it gets. It is not non-clinical. But it's an exciting world. You're reaching out to many patients through HCPs. You're empowering the HCPs to make a difference in patients' life by treating the right patients, by making them aware. You are ensuring that evidence is there where it is required, generated, published where it is required. You're getting products into the company, therefore access to the medicines for patients who need it from
Right.
innovation, whether your company is innovating or you're in licensing it. You are also ensuring that you're removing regulatory obstacles and getting it approved for the right patients. And you are also communicating value to the payers who need to know so that your drug gets into the system where patients can access it for the right indications.
Right.
So how is it a non-clinical job? You're making sure at the end of the day, the patient is getting a safe medicine. They're getting access to it. HCPs are understanding the whole journey where they need to, and you're ensuring that the HCPs are more empowered. So you are impacting more patients' lives. So welcome to this world with lots of challenges also, where learning will make you not just a better professional, even a greater leader at the end of the day. So yeah, it's a rocking world, I would say.
Right. No, that's an excellent way to look at it. And I'm sure there are so many learnings, whether the person who wants to become a medical advisor, who's just recently joined as an MSL, or a new medical affairs person who has just started off with his job. I mean, all these insights are so much helpful and inspiring that I'm almost certain that this podcast is going to help them in carving their niche in the industry. So it was very, very nice meeting you. And thank you so very much for taking out your valuable time for this podcast. And we really wish you luck for all your future endeavors and all the leadership that you are putting across to make a pharma a better place.
Thank you very much for the kind words once again. Thank you very much for inviting me and making a part of this. Humbled and thankful for this opportunity. Happy to share whatever I've learned over the years. It was a pleasure talking to you. Looking forward to meeting you face to face in the very near future. But thanks once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.